There's a certain energy in the world, a hunger for meaning, for freedom, for a sense of life that's more than running laps on a hamster wheel. If you want to know where my philosophy comes from, what shaped my sense of purpose, and why I refuse to accept the world as it is, you have to understand Crimethinc. Not as a group, not as a brand, but as a living current, a spirit of revolt that's never content with survival, always reaching for a life worthy of the name. Crimethinc for me was never just about critique or resistance. It was about eudaimonia, the flourishing life. It was the anarchist soul, defiant and joyful, breaking open the cage, not just for the sake of escape, but for the possibility of becoming fully as individuals and as a species. This is where philosophy meets reality. The Greeks called it eudaimonia, the state of living in accordance with your true nature, the highest good, the only life worth having. Aristotle saw it as more than happiness, a kind of full spectrum flourishing that comes from actualizing your deepest capacities. He called that process Entelechy, the internal drive, the built-in urge for every living thing to realize what it's meant to be. For him, an acorn becomes an oak, not by accident, but because it is impelled by its very nature toward fullness. Human beings, too, have entelechy, the drive not just to exist, but to become. Crimethinc at its core is that spirit in rebellion against every structure that would smother it. It's the refusal to mistake existence for living, or submission for peace. What spoke to me as a young thinker wasn't just the poetry of revolt or the romance of insurrection. It was the invitation to take responsibility for your own life, your own mind, your own time, and to refuse the trade of that birthright for a little comfort or security. In the pages of Days of War, Nights of Love, I found a radical reminder that you are not a resource to be managed, a tool to be spent, or a consumer to be pacified. You are a being with entelechy, a life with meaning not handed down, but created, discovered, and fought for. But this isn't just about the individual. The Enlightenment socialist perspective begins where the old individualism leaves off. It recognizes that true eudaimonia is impossible under conditions of structural coercion, scarcity, or the forced dependency of one on another. There can be no flourishing, no full realization of self in a society where the basics of life are held hostage by the owners of capital, where autonomy is rationed and permission must be begged. What Crimethinc taught me, and what Enlightenment socialism makes practical, is that the liberation of the self is only meaningful when it's universalized. It is not enough for a handful of rebels to break free. The conditions that make freedom real must be built for all. Enlightenment socialism begins with the simple, radical premise that the material world shapes the possible. You cannot philosophize your way to flourishing if your housing, your food, your time, and your future are all leased to you by others. The path to eudaimonia runs through abundance, not as luxury, but as the baseline for freedom. Sovereign homes, liberated time, and the end of wage slavery are not mere policies. They are the architecture for a society where entelechy is possible for everyone. They are the scaffolding that lets a person wake up and ask, what can I become? Not, how will I survive? Crimethinc refused to wait for permission, and that is the ethic I've carried into my own work. It taught me to distrust the gatekeepers of meaning, the politicians, the priests, the bosses, the landlords, the entire class of middlemen who insert themselves between people and their own becoming. Enlightenment socialism is the organized refusal to let these old powers define what is possible. It is the disciplined, patient construction of a society where the question of meaning is put back where it belongs, in the hands of every person, in the soil of everyday life. Meaning making for Crimethinc was never abstract. It was concrete, immediate, practical. It was the act of making a meal with friends instead of buying fast food. It was the choice to wonder, to create, to experiment, to risk comfort for the sake of experience. This is the heart of Entelechy, living so that at the end of your days, you can say you became what you were meant to become. The structures of capitalism, of managed decline, of artificial scarcity are all enemies of this process. They force us to trade our best hours, our curiosity, our bodies and minds for the privilege of existing on someone else's terms. They train us to accept realism as a synonym for resignation. But I reject that bargain. Enlightenment socialism rejects it, not because it is utopian, but because it is rational, scientific, and necessary for human flourishing. Crimethinc was the first to show me that every act of refusal is also an act of creation. That every time you choose meaning over monotony, you build a precedent, a prototype, a new possibility. But without material liberation, these choices are reserved for the lucky few. That's why the work now is to end the conditions of domination at the root. The soul of my philosophy, the spark that animates my conception of eudaimonia, entelechy, and meaning, is the refusal to let the boundaries of possibility be set by those who profit from our captivity. I want a world where meaning is not a luxury, but the foundation, where the basics of life, home, time, food, water, health, are so universal, so taken for granted, that the real project of living can begin for everyone. A world where entelechy is the norm, not the exception, where the pursuit of flourishing is not an act of rebellion, but the rhythm of society itself.